Uh, Thanks everyone for joining us today, and I am so pleased to be joining March 4th today in bringing this group together. Um, you know, we represent a whole host of sort of political views and life experiences at this table, and one of the things that Washington, D.C. does not do well is nuance. You're either red or you're blue, you're either for it or you're against it. We really break things down into very dichotomous relationships, and the real world does not work that way. I'm a big believer, as someone who has spent my entire life as a gun owner, that you can be a gun owner, you can be a sportsman, and simultaneously you can realize that we should not have ubiquitous access to weapons of war in our country. Because it's not safe and because the incredible toll that we are all paying as a result of the current lay of the land and the current lack of regulation of assault weapons. That is what set me on a course a number of years ago towards trying to write legislation now called the Go Safe Act that really gets at the mechanics of what makes some of these assault weapons so dangerous. Things like high-capacity magazines and the gas-operated actions that you see ubiquitously used in assault weapons and ubiquitously used, unfortunately, in mass shootings. So that's what we've tried to address today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from all of you. I think we'll take a round, and we'll start with the sheriff and just go all the way around and give each of you a couple of minutes to introduce yourself and just describe for folks how you came to be working on this issue. Sheriff.
Thank you, Senator. I am Kim Stewart. I am the sheriff of Doña Ana County in southern New Mexico. And I am very honored to be asked to step out in front of this legislation. For us in law enforcement, of course, mass casualty events are probably our biggest concern, if not the concern of all Americans. And especially when we're talking about being able to reload numerous magazines within a very short period of time. So I was very attracted to this because, of course, if you have fixed magazine, that's certainly giving law enforcement much more opportunity to move in on a situation and take action before there are more casualties. So thank you for the
Thanks, Sheriff.
proposal.
John.
Thank you so much, Senator. I'm also honored and privileged to be here. My name is John Hambley. I'm a resident of Maine. I'm a gun owner, and I'm also a veteran. I served in the Marine Corps as an officer in charge of an infantry unit for 2 deployments. And more importantly, I'm a father, and I'm a husband, and I think it's essential that the reason I'm here is, like all of us, through tragic necessity. I think we have to look this in the eye and address it. And my 2 boys are young enough where it's not really a conversation in school yet, but it will be. And I'm horrified about how complacent we've all become, and this has become the new norm, and it's time to stop.
Thank you, John. Sarah.
I wrote mine down because I'm on TV, so I'm very verbose, and I like to hear myself talk. It'll keep me more concise. Sarah Spain, I'm an award-winning sports journalist, and people might be surprised to hear that there's diversity of thought in sport, but it's actually the perfect representation of bipartisan teamwork. If you're on a team, your teammates are from different backgrounds, political beliefs, religions, races, and you have to work together with a common goal. And if you're a fan, you sit next to people of all different backgrounds, wearing the same gear, cheering for the same thing, even if you may have vastly different beliefs. And along with religion and politics, I would say sports is our most tribal thing. It is our identity. That's why we say we won instead of they. And because of that, I've learned in journalism, in addition to how to vet facts and listen and respond to opposing views and make my point, I've also learned that because I talk about sports and I'm on people's favorite show, they'll listen to me talk about other things that otherwise they might avoid. And when I'm talking to them, I'm given a chance to talk to people who fundamentally disagree with me on a lot of things. And I have to not presume that they lack humanity. I have to not presume that they're bad people, but rather try to figure out and understand their point of view. When we're talking about something like guns, I don't believe anyone wants children to die at school. I don't believe anybody wants people to die at the grocery store and church. So we need to get away from propaganda and keep them focused on facts. And that's namely that the risk of a person in the U.S. dying in a mass shooting was 70% lower when the assault ban was still active. Researchers estimated that the law was, if it had been in effect from 2005 through 2019, it would have prevented 30 mass shootings that resulted in the death of 339 people and wounded over 1,100 more. Assault weapons were used in 9 of the 10 deadliest mass shootings between 2015 and 2022. We have to keep people focused on those facts. There was a really powerful story a couple weeks ago, the Washington Post, that you were involved with, Senator. And former Senator Mark Udall, who voted against the assault weapons ban back after Sandy Hook, said if he could go back in a time machine, he would tell himself, this is going to get worse and worse. More and more people are going to be deeply affected by this. And I think deeply affected is a sanitized way of saying dead. Hundreds more are dead since that inaction. And if we wait another 10 years and then wish for a time machine to go back, wondering how many other lives were lost because of our inaction, we have to hold that as our own. So another generation of people can't undergo trauma, watch trauma, or worry about trauma because of assault weapons in their community. I don't think any American citizen needs an assault weapon, and plenty of lives depend on our action and not inaction this time.
Thanks, Sarah. Whitney.
All right. Hi, I'm Whitney Port. I have used my platform for the past 15 years to highlight women's issues, and especially recently the issues that face mothers. And this is obviously not just a mother issue. This is a whole country issue. And I like you wrote mine down because I can be very wordy. But I have a 6-year-old child, and the realization that my child is practicing for a mass shooting at school fills me with fear and overwhelming stress. It's obviously a situation that I never anticipated, and I felt lost about what to do. Last year, I heard Kitty, the amazing founder of March 4th, speak and was immediately touched and felt a physical and emotional reaction to actually go out and do something. And I think as a quote influencer, I can be put into a box, but I feel like it's my job, it's my role to expose what certain organizations like this are doing. The safety of our children and families is paramount, and so I decided to get active with March 4th as they have the most obvious and what I feel to be the most actionable messaging when it comes to this issue, to limit the access of assault rifles. There does not need to be such easy access to them.
Yeah. Thanks, Whitney. Wilson.
Good afternoon. My name is Wilson Cruz. Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Senator, for being here with us today. My name is Wilson Cruz. I'm an actor by trade, currently on Star Trek Discovery. But today, I represent my family. I am a nephew and a family member devastated by gun violence. My aunt, Brenda Marquez McCool, was murdered at the Orlando Pulse nightclub shooting while she placed her body between the shooter and her son, who survived. I'm also here as a citizen who's exhausted of seeing families traumatized by the loss of their loved ones, by instruments of death that have no place on our streets. This bill calls for a ban on weapons that were literally created in order to end human life, to destroy human bodies. If we claim to be a society that values life, the very least we can do is pass this bill and save more human lives by removing these instruments of terror. And so if I can be here to lend my name and to represent my family, who are all here with me in my heart, calling for this end, it's the very least I can do.
Thank you, Wilson. Melissa.
Good afternoon. My name is Melissa Alexander. I didn't prepare a statement today because my statement has been prepared for me. On March 27th, my son survived the mass shooting at the Covenant School in Nashville, Tennessee. As a mother of a mass shooting survivor, living in a community of victims and survivors, we've experienced firsthand the devastation of gun violence and death. I'm here today because as a conservative family and as lifelong gun owners, mother of a mass shooting survivor who's also a hunter, who has his own guns, and a family of hunters who knows how to properly handle weapons, I'm here today to lend my voice to this cause. I'm begging for change. I'm begging for our children's lives. Thank you.
Melissa.
Hi, I'm Melissa Joan Hart. I am an actor, director, wife, and most importantly, mother. Like Wilson said, I'm exhausted. 12 years ago, we were living in Fairfield County, Connecticut, and a mentally ill boy that day took his mom's guns and murdered 26 innocent people in a nearby school to where my children were. It included 20 first graders, and my son at the time was in the first grade. My entire life changed that day, and my political views changed that day. Then less than a year ago, almost 12 years after the Sandy Hook Elementary shooting, I was driving to my children's school in our home of Nashville, Tennessee, to a parent-teacher conference, and I was about a half a mile from our school when I saw a young woman with dozens of small children run out of the woods. And my first thought was, what is this woman doing in the street crossing a 5-lane highway with these tiny children? And as I reached to help the children and help them cross the road, it became clear that whatever they were running from was scarier than these cars in the street. And the fear on their faces and the terror and the confusion as we got them to safety, and then the 6 ambulances that drove by us and let us know exactly what had happened, these memories will not allow me to stop fighting for ways to keep our children and our communities and our country safer. That day, we lost 3 educators and 3 third-grade children from the Covenant School, and my youngest son was in the 3rd grade at the time. And once again, tragedy had hit so close to home, and I had to stop and wonder, once again, will we be next? And I had been a staunch Second Amendment woman who believed our freedoms could not be infringed upon with new laws. And back in 2012, after the shooting at Sandy Hook, I spent months of sleepless nights praying for the families of that nearby town. I started wanting to make sure that that could never happen again. And in digging and educating myself on guns and gun laws across the nation, I learned that laws do change. That, in fact, it happens all the time to make our world a safer place. I learned that MAD, the Mothers Against Drunk Driving, had been successful in preventing drunk driving accidents over tough, relentless years of battles with politicians. And I wanted to see that happen with this situation. I used to believe that you couldn't mess with the Second Amendment because that's a threat to our freedom as Americans. But now I can say that we are not free as long as weapons of war are allowed in the hands of untrained, unchecked citizens. We are not free if our children are forced to practice lockdown drills at school and at church. And we are not free if we have to live in fear. Thank you.
Thank you. John, I want to ask you a question as a, I guess there's no such thing as a former Marine, right? You're just a Marine. Talk to us a little bit about how much training is required for to use these kinds of firearms when you're in the armed services, and the sort of the difference in what a Marine or a soldier goes through, and the fact that these things are just widely and permissively available in our culture today.
Thank you, Senator. And the point is well taken. There's such a divide between what a trained soldier or Marine or anyone in the armed service goes through and the common citizen outside. And, you know, from my perspective, you know, I think the Marine Corps specifically, which was my branch, they do an incredible job on day one of really maintaining accountability and safe handling. It becomes a part of your everyday. It becomes the norm. You know, you start, whether it's boot camp or officer candidate school, whatever way you come into the service, you know, you learn the basics of marksmanship. You learn how to shoot, how to hit a target at 500 yards individually, the fundamentals of marksmanship. That becomes more advanced as the training continues. You learn how to shoot, move, and communicate as a small unit, then by a larger unit, and it gets more complex, different environments, stressed environments. That's the incremental training that happens with automatic weapons. You know, when I was thinking about this, the most astonishing part of all of this is the level of accountability and the level of regulation that happens every single day when you're wearing the uniform. Right. You know, there's times when, you know, my service, my branch, every single year, this most elite fighting force in the entire world, every year you have to go and re-qualify on a rifle that you've used for years. Combat deployments later, you've obviously had experience, but yet it requires you to go back and learn the basics of safety, be proficient, and accountability. And this is not a check in the box exercise. This is days every year you have to do this. Furthermore, you can't go home at night until every single weapon is counted and accounted for. So meaning, you know, there's someone's job and everyone's job, and generals are relieved because of these things when they do go wrong. If a rifle's missing or unaccounted for, the base locks down, and you can't go home until it's found. My point is, this becomes muscle memory, and with the occasional eye roll, maybe, no one thinks twice about it. Everyone from a 19-year-old private to a general knows what these weapons can do because they're trained in them. They know how devastating these can be, and so it's taken seriously, and it's not protested, and it's not debated over. It becomes the same as getting into your car every day. It's a daily muscle memory, and I'm proud that the military has those standards, and, you know, you're not allowed to even have a registered firearm. You have to keep it with the armor like this. Yeah, so my point is this. I think the key takeaway in terms of someone coming from the military is that, you know, elite combat units, highly specialized, very well trained, are still go through a level of scrutiny and accountability that goes with the territory. Obviously, that is not the case on the civilian side. And my hope is that as a veteran and someone who believes in higher regulation, that more veterans will speak up saying what they went through, and also bringing that accountability to the civilian sector and making sure that it's rolled over. I feel, you know, as Americans, we're so good at rallying during crises. We've done it before, Pearl Harbor, 9/11, the list goes on. You know, the opioid epidemic, all these driving accidents, alcohol, tobacco, we've attacked it head on. Yet there's something unique about firearms and assault weapons that is a gray area. And I'm astonished that we've had such gridlock, and I hope that the military experience will translate over to the civilian sector.
Thank you, John. Sheriff, as you know, the DOJ report came out on the Uvalde school shooting just last week, and it kind of begs the question, you know, is law enforcement outgunned in some of these mass shooting events, and what does it really mean for community safety to have these types of weapons so ubiquitously available in our country?
Well, you bring up a couple of layers of that. There are over 400 million weapons supposedly owned by Americans. And with only 350 million people, that means that every man, woman, and child has a gun. So I think the conversation about easy access, now especially with ghost guns and manufactured parts, people essentially sitting at home with very minimal training and very minimal expense, manufacturing things that are certainly weapons of mass destruction. So I think that we're already, I don't think we're outgunned. I'll probably be stoned for this, but let me just say we're outspoken about it. My profession just doesn't speak up enough frankly, about this concern. I recognize I'm an elected official. I represent all sorts of individuals, as you do in our state. But I don't know why legal gun ownership and the Second Amendment are mutually exclusive. Why? We don't have that same mindset with vehicles. So I kind of get off topic there on that with you a little bit, but I don't believe we're outgunned just as the military. We practice with weapons. My own department, we qualify twice a year, which is a lift with cost of ammunition and so forth. It's worth it. We stay ahead of the trends in terms of arms. We're continually looking at what we need to do our job. I think what we need to do our job in my profession is more of us to speak up.
Thank you, Sheriff. To Melissa, talk a little bit about in the aftermath of what happened in your home state at the Covenant School. Has sentiment changed? Are you somewhat unique, or is this a sentiment that can change broadly across the country?
I believe that all Americans want the same thing, right? We want our children and our families to be safe. And in the conversations that I've had following the Covenant shooting, especially around Tennessee, I'm encouraged by everyone I've spoken to. And my family is very diverse, from far left to far right and everything in between. And my friends are as well. And so I feel like I've had these conversations with people across the board, and I think everyone wants their children to be safe. We just disagree on how to do that. But I think that but nobody's saying we're coming for all your guns. Nobody's saying that. And that's the thing that everybody's like, if you're not saying you're coming for all the guns, there are definitely rules, laws that can be put into place that will keep people safer that I believe 99% of my friends and family will get behind. And in Tennessee, I think that the tides are turning because it has hit at home now. And I do think that hearts are turning towards solutions. And I believe that your act is a great place to start.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback off of what Melissa said. I've heard a lot of conversations in Tennessee around how can we make our laws safer. We have some of the loosest gun laws in the country. And again, I'm speaking about this from the perspective of a gun owner and a lifelong Tennessean and a conservative voter. And not just the anecdotal evidence, but the polls that have been coming out in Tennessee, one after the other. There have been 4 so far. One was put out by the governor's office. And every single poll, 70 to 75% of respondents said, we want safer gun laws. 70 to 75%. Okay, so that's 2/3 to 3/4 of Tennesseans in a very red, conservative, supermajority state that say, we need you to make change in this state. We want to be safer. And so, yes, the sentiment has changed. It hit home, and we don't want another tragedy like what happened at Covenant.
You know, I think one of the things that both of you represent that I can relate to is I grew up in a very conservative, very small rural community. And what I will say about gun culture when I was a kid is that it was such a culture of safety. Like it was really, gun safety was just drilled into you. And you would do things like hunter safety at school. And somewhere along the way, we got to a culture of complete permissiveness. And my hope is that we're recorrecting again to say, guns are fine, but there's a responsibility here. And we self-impose limits to make sure that our communities, our children are safe. Wilson, you have an amazing perspective, and I'm so sorry for what touched your family. If what would you say, I guess, to anyone, elected official, friend, neighbor, what have you, who's on the fence about how to prevent these kinds of tragedies?
I suppose I would ask them to get in touch with their humanity. I I don't understand when we have data that makes it very clear how effective the former assault weapons ban was in preventing death and injury. When we see the number of Americans who want change, not just 50%, but over 50% of the population wants stricter gun laws. When we see how traumatized families are across this country, no matter whether they're in urban or rural areas, red or blue states, when those families are re-traumatized every time another mass shooting happens in this country, when we have all that information and you are a representative of the citizenry, I think you're not living up to your task, your job, to represent the American people. You're representing something other than the values that we claim to have in this country. And I think, I mean, far be it from me to speak for the entire country, but we're tired of thoughts and prayers.
Yeah.
We're tired of breaking news about another shooting at another school.
Yeah.
We're tired of having our kids come home detailing how they had to duck and cover and practice for the inevitability of a shooter coming into a classroom. Enough already. I would say we are a nation that values life. So let's act like it.
Thank you, Wilson. I want to pick up on something Wilson said and ask you, Whitney. You know, until my own kids went through it, and I didn't realize how much these active shooter drills impact. You think about the mass shootings impact all the other kids, but talk about your own experience with what it means to have young children practicing active shooter drills and how that impacts them.
I mean, I feel almost guilty being up here among everyone because I haven't been personally affected, but I think that I'm standing here. I'm standing here representing all those who live in fear that this will happen to them and have the anxiety that this will happen to them. And I was talking to Kitty last night. My son had come from school and he told me that they had practiced what he said was like a fire drill, but he had to get in the bathroom and hide. And it immediately, like, my whole body tensed up, and I tensed up for him, just this little 6-year-old brain who has no idea how to process these huge adult things. And I mean, we don't even know how to process them. We're not even supposed to know how to process them because this isn't even supposed to be happening. I think the anxiety in these kids is having a huge, huge effect because it's putting something in their brains, like I said, that they have no idea exists or how to process. And I think that it requires them to think of solutions and to think of what ifs. And I think the anxiety then bleeds into all areas of their life. And we're just raising very anxious, depressed kids. And there's something that can be done about it. And obviously that's why we're all here today.
Yeah. I really did not fully appreciate, my kids never really talked about the active shooter drills a lot. But I was in a meeting and we were in a room like this one, and my oldest son was out of school that day. And so he happened to be at the meeting. And someone walked into the back and pulled out what looked like a pistol to him. And it was just a temperature sensor. It was like an HVAC tech who was coming to check on the temperature in the room, make sure everything was working right. And the fear that I saw,
Yeah.
it's just incredible. And that's when it really hit home for me.
I mean, that's what Katie said last night. She said that the school informs her in advance of when the drills are happening, which is something that I did not get advance notice of, which I would like. But and I'm so sorry that I'm telling your story, but she specifically pulled her child out of school that day as to not be part of that drill because she didn't want, the anxiety and the fear was so much worse to her. So it's a lot.
Sarah, you're part of a growing, really, contingent of sports leaders who are speaking out on this issue. We've seen Golden State Warriors head coach Steve Kerr and University of Oregon's football coach Dan Lanning and others joining your chorus. Talk a little bit more about, because of the kind of work you do, how you're able to reach people who are not always as open as maybe we would hope. And certainly you have a platform that's completely different than mine, and we appreciate that. So talk a little bit about that, Sarah.
Well, Steve Kerr in particular is a unique one because his own father was murdered, lost to gun violence when he was young, and he now is put in a position unrelated to basketball where he represents a city and a community every day, and when something awful happens, he is expected to speak on it. This is the case for athletes and coaches and people who did not choose to represent their city when it comes to political, social, or tragic occurrences, but the result of their job is that they have to get up in front of a microphone and answer questions about it and speak about it. And just like their constituents for a politician, their fans are all different folks. And they're listening because this is someone that, like I said, it's tribal, it's identity. They're on your team if it's your team. And they listen differently. And I think to your point of part of the issue is getting the right people to speak up. When the chorus of people who are afraid of their rights being taken is much louder than the chorus of people who can speak to the realities of the rights that are removed by those who are murdered or injured in these shootings, we lose the battle. It's not about us disagreeing about whether we should feel free and safe. It's about how we can do that. And ultimately, what we know about assault weapons is that they cause more deaths and injuries when they're used in these shootings. Gun reform as a larger issue is very important, but if we know that gun reform as a larger issue is nearly impossible with the way it's politicized and the two sides taking their team, then what we can do is try to address something that seems common sense, matter of fact, and is backed by data. And when these coaches and these athletes or anyone with a platform can speak to the numbers and can say you are 70% less likely to die in a mass shooting if the federal assault weapons ban is in action than when it's not, there isn't an argument to be made there about whether this will make you safer. You can then later have conversations about other gun reform and the ways you're worried about how this might reflect on that later. But we can't throw out the baby with the bathwater and do absolutely nothing because we're afraid of what we might do later. We can do the thing that will make us all safer. And fortunately, we do have people like Steve Kerr, Greg Popovich, or plenty of other really important and informed people who are willing to use their platform for that. And unfortunately, there are so many of us who did not imagine that they would be put in a position to speak on this. But when you are, it's necessary for us to keep talking because otherwise it becomes too loud. The idea for you and your fellow lawmakers that this will not get you voted back in, that this will end up, preventing you from doing other things that you want to get done. But that inaction is your legacy, just as much as the things that you do get done are the things that you don't, and we can't be afraid.
I want to thank really everyone here for bringing your unique voices to this conversation. Maybe we'll just open things up. I'm going to have to run upstairs here in a few minutes and we'll wrap, but maybe open up a few questions for folks to any of our panelists or to myself, and then we'll conclude.
I think most everyone here is with us, right?
Well, thank you all. Obviously, you know, in politics today, if you change your mind, there's a stigma that comes with that. You're called a flip-flopper or what have you. What I will say is that having started out in a very different position on these issues, I think it's important that leaders of all stripes are able to accept new information and change their mind because they have better information. And we have been stuck on this issue for so long. And what I saw, fortunately, after Uvalde was suddenly, even though we couldn't do everything we needed to do on the issue, there was a willingness to do something. And we passed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which is making a meaningful difference on everything from mental health to being able to prosecute gun trafficking. And we need to take that kind of approach, that pragmatic, let's do something, and especially when the data is so clear and the stories are so tragic, to take that first step. And thank you all for making that possible.
Well, I just want to say, I think it's important to acknowledge when our leaders do the right thing. And so I want to thank you for your leadership on this.
Thanks, Wilson. Appreciate it.
If you all could get around Senator Heinrich and Sheriff Stewart. Sheriff Stewart and Senator Heinrich, please stay seated. Coming.
I guess I'm going to keep going with this.
Okay.